On a stormy summer night, while I was hovering between life and death in labor, my husband, the man who shared my bed, turned off his phone and left for a luxury resort to celebrate his 1-month anniversary with his mistress. 3 days later, that shameless man dragged his suitcase back home, ready to put on a tearful performance. But he froze at the front door when he saw a strange man tenderly holding his newborn child. Even his own parents ruthlessly kicked him out of the house. That was not all. That wicked human being had concocted a horrifying plot to set up a shell company, send me to federal prison, and live a life of luxury with his mistress using that stolen money. But that hypocrite never could have imagined that his wife, whom he ignored and mocked for losing her figure after childbirth, had prepared a devastating hand of revenge right in the middle of a brightly lit, welcome baby VIP gala a month later. It was a divorce scandal that would turn Seattle upside down. It was a firm, merciless, and immediate dose of karma. Yet, it is also my story, filled with the resilience and practical wisdom characteristic of a strong woman. If you were ever faced with such a bitter betrayal, would you be able to remain as calm and use the situation to your advantage like I did? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let me tell you the story of what I went through. Holding my heavily pregnant belly at 39 weeks, I watched my husband, Julian, humming a tune as he zipped up his shiny suitcase. A silver necklace he had bought for his mistress fell to the floor. Even then, he shamelessly made up an excuse, claiming it was a gift for a commercial real estate partner he was meeting in Miami. The smell of perfume wafting from Julian's dress shirt was the exact same unfamiliar scent I had accidentally noticed on the edge of a receipt in his passenger seat 2 weeks prior. My heart sank, and an ominous feeling pierced my chest. But looking at the boxes of fabric scattered across the middle of our textile manufacturing warehouse, I stood up, enduring the throbbing pain in my lower back. I leaned on a rattan chair and struggled over to the cutting table to flip through the ledger. Julian kept complaining while applying hair gel in front of a large mirror in the corner of the warehouse. He told me to move those cardboard boxes to the corner, complaining that if they got wet in the storm, the entire shipment for their client would be ruined. I replied in an exhausted voice without looking up, telling him the employees had already put everything in the storage room and wrapped the sample boxes securely in plastic. I asked him if this business trip would really take 3 whole days. Julian turned around with a bright expression, walked over, and held my 2 trembling hands. He spoke in a sweet voice. It was the whisper of a devil that I had mistakenly believed to be genuine for the past few years. He told me he could not miss this Miami trip. He claimed he was meeting a major player in real estate development who only had exactly 3 days available this weekend. He called it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, insisting that if he did not go, other guys would snatch the deal. I reminded him that the doctor said labor could start any day this week. My belly had already dropped a few days ago. I asked him what I was supposed to do if he left now, wondering who I could rely on if contractions started in the middle of the night. He waved his hand and laughed hollowly. He called me a worrywart, saying our unborn son loved his dad so much that he would wait quietly until his dad came back with millions of dollars. He told me to relax at home, reminding me that his parents, who ran a nursery farm out in Snohomish, would check on me constantly. He said he had everything planned out. He bragged about the massive commission he would get if this property deal went through, promising to buy me a brand new SUV for my grocery runs so I could stop driving my rusty, rattling old sedan. I let out a soft sigh and bent down to clear the loose threads from the cutting table, only to feel a small, clinking object hit the tip of my toe. I bent over to pick it up and saw it was a thin silver necklace. Under the fluorescent lights, the pendant sparkled, revealing the letter S. My name starts with a C, and since I am allergic to cheap metals and never wear them, it was definitely not mine. I held the necklace up to his face and spoke in a chillingly calm voice. I asked him what had fallen out of his suitcase, noting that the initial S was very pretty. Julian snatched the necklace from my hand as if robbing me. His face lost its color instantly, his eyes darting around anxiously before he hurriedly shoved it into his suit pants pocket. Trying to hide his panic, he forced a laugh and raised his voice. He stammered that it belonged to a buddy from his real estate networking group who had asked him to hold on to it to give to a new girlfriend in Miami. He claimed the woman's name was Sienna, or something similar. He reminded me how he was always too generous with helping others, complaining that he was already incredibly busy but still running errands for other people. Looking deep into his eyes, I caught the extreme anxiety hidden behind his fake smile. The S pendant. The tuberose perfume smell on his shirt. Every piece of the puzzle came together vividly before my eyes, completing a stark picture of betrayal. Sienna was the junior employee working at his real estate firm. She was the woman who always wore tight dresses and drowned herself in that disgusting perfume. She was the woman who always threw sideways glances at my husband whenever I brought lunch to his office. Suppressing the coldly fading emotions inside me, I offered a faint smile. I told him his friend was very romantic. I advised him to keep his phone close when signing the land contracts in Miami, just in case his mother or I had an emergency and needed to reach him right away. Terrified of facing any more questions, Julian grabbed his suitcase and hurried toward the steel door. He looked back and threw out one last nonchalant remark. He mentioned he forgot to tell me the resort was right on the beach and had terrible cell reception. On top of that, he claimed the organizers had a strict policy requiring everyone to turn off their phones to focus on the seminars. He told me not to call him and promised to call me himself if anything urgent came up. He said his ride was waiting outside and left abruptly. Before I could even open my mouth, the steel door slammed shut, echoing a dry, hollow sound throughout the large warehouse. It was a terrifyingly lonely sound. I stood nailed to the floor in the middle of the empty, massive space. The only sounds were the heavy raindrops aggressively battering the tin roof and the howling wind slipping through the cracks. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights on the ceiling flickered and went out completely with a loud pop. The warehouse was instantly submerged in thick darkness, illuminated only by the flashes of lightning seeping in through the windows. As I fumbled to find the rechargeable lantern on the corner of the cutting table, a sharp pain starting from my lower back violently stabbed my lower abdomen. My legs gave out from the excruciating agony that felt like my internal organs were being ripped apart. I heard a muffled pop from my belly, and a sticky, hot liquid flowed down, soaking my feet and staining the gray tile floor a deep red. My water had broken, and I was hemorrhaging. Extreme terror swallowed my rationality. I crawled across the cold floor, squeezing out every last ounce of my strength to grab the cell phone off the cutting table. The blue light of the phone screen illuminated my pale, sweat-drenched face. I dialed Julian's familiar number. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. By the 10th time, the only response I got was the mechanical voice stating the caller was unavailable and redirecting me to voicemail. Amidst the sound of the rain outside, my consciousness gradually faded. Biting my lips so hard I did not even realize it was bleeding, the abandoned mother was fighting a desperate battle against the Grim Reaper, standing right at the threshold of the delivery room. I do not know how long I lay collapsed on that freezing warehouse floor. Through a severe haze, a loud banging on the front door, and my mother-in-law's frantic screams pierced my ears. Hearing the sound of breaking glass during the storm, my in-laws had driven through the torrential rain, driven by a terrible premonition. When the tightly locked steel door was forced open and my mother-in-law saw her daughter-in-law lying in a pool of blood, she collapsed to the floor, pulling my head into her arms and sobbing uncontrollably. She cried out my name, asking where that wretched son of hers had gone and how he could leave me in this state. She yelled at her husband to call a cab immediately. My father-in-law frantically made calls in the pouring rain, but with the roads completely flooded from the storm, there was not a single taxi willing to take a dispatch at that hour of the dawn. Seeing my maternity clothes turning a deep red, he wiped his tears, dragged his trembling body, and ran through the rain. He knocked on the door of the local urgent care clinic run by Dr. Harrison at the edge of town. Just a few minutes later, the clinic's robust SUV screeched to a halt in front of the warehouse door. Dr. Harrison, a man of sturdy build, jumped out of the vehicle, scooped me up in his warm arms, and laid me down in the back seat. The car tore through the silent dawn, splashing water everywhere, while the roar of the engine mixed with the sobbing of my in-laws in the back. As soon as we arrived at the general hospital lobby, a stretcher was rushed down the hallway under the bright white fluorescent lights. The attending physician quickly checked my condition, turned to my in-laws with a grim expression, and spoke urgently. He said the mother's condition was extremely critical. The baby was positioned head up, and the umbilical cord was wrapped around the neck twice, causing the fetal heart rate to drop rapidly. Due to severe hemorrhaging from placental abruption, natural birth was entirely impossible, and an emergency C-section had to be performed immediately. He demanded that a guardian sign the surgical consent form right away. Hearing the words emergency surgery and hemorrhaging, my mother-in-law's legs gave way, and her face turned completely white. The hand holding the pen the nurse handed her shook like a leaf in the wind, and she merely drew an unrecognizable squabble on the signature line. Shaking her head, my mother-in-law wailed. She told the doctor she was too terrified to do it. With a human life on the line and that worthless husband nowhere to be found, she cried that as merely the mother-in-law, She had no right to sign it, she sobbed, asking how she could ever face my parents if something went wrong. Dr. Harrison, who was standing nearby assessing the volatile situation, stepped forward. He placed one hand on my mother-in-law's shoulder to calm her down and took the consent form with his other hand. Looking straight at the doctor, he spoke with extreme calmness and absolute authority. He introduced himself as Dr. Harrison from the local clinic, stating he would act as the medical guarantor and witness for this surgery. He asked my mother-in-law to calm down and requested the doctor allow him to speak with me. Dr. Harrison leaned down close to my ear. He grabbed my freezing hand tightly and offered a deep, warm voice that grounded my wavering sanity. He asked if I could hear him. He told me there was no time to wait for my husband. The life of the child in my belly was a matter of seconds. He told me I had to be strong. He urged me to grab the pen myself and sign the paper so the doctor could enter the operating room. He asked if I could do it. Dr. Harrison's words acted like a powerful electric current, awakening a dormant mother's survival instinct. I opened my trembling lips, took a deep breath to push away the suffocating pain, and whispered through gasping breaths. I asked for the pen, saying I would do it. I vowed that I would save my own child. The nurse quickly placed a clipboard underneath and guided my curled fingers. The moment the pen tip pressed deeply into the white paper, carving the letters of my name, Clara, I realized I no longer had the right to be weak. The doors to the operating room opened, and I was pushed into a room where massive surgical lights spun dizzily above. Midway through the surgery, the doctor's tense voice echoed once again. He announced they were running critically low on their supply of O-negative blood, and the transfer from the central blood bank was delayed by the storm. Because I had lost too much blood from hemorrhaging, there was no time to bring blood in from another hospital. He asked if anyone outside had the same blood type. Through the slightly open crack of the operating room doors, Dr. Harrison's resolute voice could be heard faintly, but without an ounce of hesitation. He declared he was a physician and would take responsibility. He said, "I know the head of transfusion medicine at Harborview. Get him on the phone for me now. I will authorize an emergency airlift if I have to. You are not losing this patient." I closed my eyes. As the anesthesia seeped deeply into my system, 2 streams of hot tears rolled down my temples. The clear, sharp cry of a baby tore through the suffocating air in the room, pulling my consciousness back to reality. The doctor approached me holding a tiny life wrapped in a white blanket and smiled compassionately. He congratulated me, saying I had a very healthy son. Both the mother and the baby were safe. He praised me for holding on so well. I looked at my tiny son, his skin red, his eyes tightly shut, waving his little hands in the air. Overwhelming emotion filled my heart. Yet, strangely, no tears of sorrow or resentment fell. It seemed all my tears had already dried up the night I signed my own surgical consent form. My 7 days in the hospital felt as long as 3 centuries. My in-laws sat by the crib with sunken eyes from lack of sleep, tearing up as they looked at their grandson. My mother-in-law tucked Leo's blanket in and lamented. She cursed her worthless son, crying that his wife had crossed the threshold of death, yet he had not shown his face once. She swore she would break his legs the moment he returned. Right at that moment, the hospital room door was thrown open violently. Julian rushed in like a storm. With his wrinkled clothes and messy hair, he looked absolutely pathetic. A wretched appearance he had deliberately styled to act as though he had suffered immensely over the past few days. However, the scene he was about to witness would serve as the first fatal blow against his betrayal. Julian froze at the threshold of the hospital room. The expensive bouquet of imported roses he held dropped to the floor. Right next to the hospital bed sat Dr. Harrison, a reliable presence, tenderly holding the newborn baby, while I stared at Julian with eyes as cold as a sheet of blank white paper. Julian looked entirely out of his mind as he stared intently at Dr. Harrison's strong hands expertly supporting frail little Leo's back. Julian's exhausted expression, originally meant to beg for pity, instantly turned ashen, and his eyes filled with despicable jealousy and rage. He took a step forward, pointed his finger right at Dr. Harrison's face, and panted heavily. He demanded to know who this man was, and why he was in his wife's hospital room at this hour. He yelled, asking who gave him permission to hold his son. Dr. Harrison was completely unfazed, looking up at Julian with his signature polite yet unyielding gaze. He slowly set Leo down in the crib, gently covered him with a blanket, and only then stood up straight to face Julian. Before Dr. Harrison could even speak, my mother-in-law, who was sitting in the corner, jumped up. Her wrinkled face, flushed red with resentment, rushed forward and gripped Julian's arm, her voice shaking with rage that the nurses passing by in the hallway flinched. A sharp, echoing smack rang out. Julian held his cheek and stuttered, asking his mother why she hit him when he had just driven a long distance to get there. My mother-in-law yelled that she was beating him to knock some sense into him, calling him worse than a beast. She sobbed and pointed at the crib. She asked how he had the nerve to crawl back into this room. She asked if he even knew how old his child was right now. She screamed that when his wife's water broke and the warehouse floor turned into a sea of blood, his phone was shut off. She told him that if Dr. Harrison had not driven his SUV to take me to the emergency room, and if he had not personally donated his own blood during the surgery, she and his father would be planning a funeral for their daughter-in-law and grandson. She demanded to know what the hell he was doing while his wife struggled at death's door. Faced with his own mother's waterfall of reprimands, Julian was left speechless. He cast an anxious glance at Dr. Harrison, but the unwavering fortitude radiating from the strange man shattered his petty pride into pieces. He managed his expression, swallowed his humiliation, and made an excuse in a shrinking voice. He stammered, telling his mother he didn't mean for this to happen. He claimed the isolated resort on the island had zero cell reception. He said the organizers confiscated their phones for 3 days and forced them into secret meetings. He argued he only went to make money to feed his family. He insisted he grabbed a boat and rushed back the second he got the news. Julian forced himself to bow his head and thank Dr. Harrison for saving his wife, though his eyes were still full of wariness and hostility. Dr. Harrison gave a slight nod and replied calmly. He said it was fine, noting that saving lives is a doctor's duty. He added that I needed absolute rest and advised Julian to take special care of me. After speaking, Dr. Harrison turned to me, sending a warm look filled with trust. He bid the elders farewell, told me he had to leave, and mentioned he needed to check on some patients at his clinic. As soon as Dr. Harrison left the room, Julian huffed and slammed the door shut. He hurried over to the bed, forcing an affectionate expression as he tried to wrap his arms around my shoulders to comfort me. But the moment his face came close, my senses, highly heightened right after childbirth, instantly picked up an unfamiliar scent. It was not the sour smell of sweat from a man who had suffered through 3 days and nights of intensive meetings. It was the sweet, overwhelming scent of tuberose perfume. It was the signature perfume of Sienna, that cheap female employee from his office. That was not all. Julian's wrist bore a clear, sharp tan line in the shape of a watch strap. It was the blatant proof that instead of being locked in a secret meeting, he had been tanning under the Florida sun for days. I gently leaned my body away to avoid his embrace and put on a calm, dry smile without a single tear of resentment. I told him he must have suffered coming all this way, noting how gaunt his face looked. I told him to hurry up and eat the warm chicken soup his mother had brought before it got cold. Julian looked baffled, as if he could not believe my words. He had probably braced himself, expecting a wife who would scream, resent him, and interrogate him. He felt secretly relieved by my bizarrely peaceful and generous demeanor, thinking he had dodged a bullet, yet he also seemed to feel a strange fear before my deep, quiet gaze. He nodded repeatedly, agreeing to eat. He expressed his immense relief that I was not angry, claiming he gritted his teeth and worked hard just for our family. He slumped into the rattan chair and hastily spooned the soup to hide his surging guilt and embarrassment. Julian ate with his head bowed down to avoid my eyes. But he failed to realize something. In the crease of his neatly ironed white dress shirt, on a spot that had never touched my olive skin, was a clear smudge of trendy orange-brown lipstick, mocking our marriage. And the moment he bent over to drink the broth, a crumpled piece of a receipt poked out from the pocket of his unwashed suit pants. My eyes locked onto that receipt. When Julian went into the bathroom to wash his face, I quickly moved to his pants draped over the chair and pulled out the receipt. It was a valet parking ticket from a luxury resort in Miami Beach. The ink was slightly smudged, but the check-in time from the previous afternoon was clearly visible. It was the exact hour I was writhing in labor pains and hemorrhaging. The black ink printed on that extravagant receipt felt like a slap to the pure trust I had built up over the years. In that moment, a recent memory flashed through my mind. Julian had claimed he failed a cryptocurrency investment and drained the entire $500,000 savings our couple had scraped together to expand the factory. And I remembered a photo Sienna had proudly posted on her social media recently, a brand new bright red Range Rover. This was not a simple one-night stand. This man's greed and cruelty had already taken deep root the day he handed the money made from my blood and sweat over to another woman. On Sunday morning, the warehouse was engulfed in silence. The industrial sewing machines covered in gray tarps were dead quiet, and the space where motor noises used to ring was filled only with the sound of the wind blowing from the flower beds outside. Julian had come home late the previous night, using client entertainment as an excuse, reeking of alcohol, and was sprawled out asleep. Watching his chest rise and fall without a care in the world, I felt vomit rising to the back of my throat. I took Julian's dirty white dress shirt out to the sink in the backyard. Under the morning sun, the orange-brown lipstick stain on the collar pierced my eyes. I filled a basin with water, poured in a generous amount of detergent, and soaked the shirt. With my 2 hands, calloused and scarred from fabric and scissors, I scrubbed the collar like a madwoman. I scrubbed until my palms were swollen red and felt like they were tearing apart. I did not cry out loud, nor did I interrogate him over the phone. I swallowed all this injustice, vowing to make those 2 garbage humans sacrifice their entire reputations and freedom as the price for my tears of blood. When I returned to the room holding Leo, Julian was awake. He was leaning against the headboard, nervously fiddling with his phone. As soon as he saw me walk in, he jumped in surprise, flipped the phone face down on the mattress, cleared his throat, and hastily changed his passcode. It was a desperate gesture to protect the filthy secrets hidden behind his old passcode, which used to be our wedding anniversary. He put on a fake smile, went down to the kitchen, and brought back a glass of warm milk, speaking in a very affectionate voice. He told me to drink some milk, saying I needed to breastfeed. He claimed my face looked so pale lately that it broke his heart. When I took the glass, the warm heat transferred to my palms, but it could not melt the solid block of ice frozen in my chest. I looked at him and asked lightly why he was worrying so much about me and the baby when he was always out and could not even eat properly himself. I asked him how things were at the commercial real estate office. Julian let out a long sigh and sat on the edge of the bed, putting on a depressed expression as if he were carrying the weight of the world. He complained that the real estate industry offered measly commissions and unpredictable monthly income. He whined about always having to follow orders from above and leaving his wife and child behind for days to go on business trips. He claimed he felt immense guilt this last time. He then said that working under someone else for the rest of his life was not the answer. With Leo growing up, he argued there would be endless expenses, and he could not bear to raise his son lagging behind others. Taking a sip of milk, I slowly asked him what he planned to do. I suggested he just come work at our factory and help manage the ledgers, since we had a steady stream of orders lately. Flashing a look of blind greed, he waved his hand dismissively. He scoffed, asking what the point of handling pennies at a dusty sewing factory was. He revealed he wanted to go independent and set up an exclusive corporate real estate firm called Apex Holdings. He bragged that he had all the partner connections lined up in other states and that the core team working under him had agreed to follow him. He said he only needed one thing, a corporate name to sign the land contracts. He promised that if this deal succeeded, we could move into a fancy apartment by next New Year. He said Leo could go to an elite private preschool and I would never have to step on a sewing machine pedal again night and day. He asked what I thought. Looking at my husband rambling on, I sneered inwardly. I lowered my eyes and played the part of the naive wife. I told him his plan sounded grand, and I liked it. But I pointed out that setting up a company involved complicated paperwork and money issues. I reminded him I was just a woman who only knew how to sew and didn't know anything about business. Hearing my words, Julian moved closer and grabbed my hands tightly. It was the moment he finally showed his true colors. He told me that was exactly why he needed my help. He explained that due to a non-compete clause in his contract with his old company, he could not register a new firm under his own name. Therefore, he asked me to just put my name down as the CEO of Apex Holdings. He promised he would handle all operations, diplomacy, contracts, and financial matters behind the scenes. He assured me all I had to do was sign the paperwork. He told me that when the dividends came in at the end of the year, I could use that money to raise our child comfortably, asking me to consider it a secret stash just for me and our son. He asked me if I understood. Apex Holdings. It certainly sounded plausible. I pulled my hands out of his and faked a panicked expression. I argued that I only knew about sewing and didn't understand law or complex documents. I worried that if I was listed as the CEO of such a big company and messed up his business, it would be a disaster. I suggested he just ask his real estate buddies to lend him their names. He frowned, annoyance flashing in his eyes, but he quickly hid it and pleaded with an earnest voice. He asked how he could trust an outsider when millions of dollars were on the line, not just a few thousand. He reminded me I was his wife and asked if I thought he would ever put me in harm's way. He called this our family's last chance to turn our lives around. He asked how I could refuse him when I knew how hard he worked out there, breaking his back for us. I laughed inwardly and let out a long, exhausted sigh. I told him the scale of it all was just too big. I asked him to give me a few days to think about it, citing that my brain was still foggy from having a baby recently and that I might forget what he just said. I promised to look over the documents carefully and give him an answer later. Seeing that I did not reject him outright, Julian looked noticeably relieved. He turned off the lights, affectionately tucked me in, grabbed his bag, and left for work. But he had no idea. The moment the sound of his engine faded into the distance, I bolted upright, changed my clothes, and stuffed every single Apex Holdings Incorporation document he had carelessly left on the desk into my bag. That afternoon, I lied to Julian, telling him I was taking my in-laws to a postpartum checkup, and left the house. Waiting at the corner of the alley was Dr. Harrison's clinic SUV. My destination was not the general hospital, but the back room of Dr. Harrison's clinic. Inside, the man who seemed gruff on the outside but had a deep and upright heart was quietly waiting, ready to flip this cruel legal gamble upside down. This is not a startup gift. It's a fatal trap designed to leave you rotting in federal prison, Dr. Harrison said with a heavy voice, as I handed over the secretly copied corporate documents. Every word out of his mouth chilled my spine like a freezing winter wind. Julian pressing me to sign the papers within a few days with sweet talk meant those scammers had found a massive target out of state, and they desperately needed a fall guy to take the legal bullet for them. Dr. Harrison pushed up his glasses, his expression frighteningly serious, as he flipped through the business registration papers. He pointed to a boldly printed sentence and looked up at me. He asked if I knew what responsibilities a legal CEO holds in a court of law. I bit my lip tightly, shook my head, and swallowed the tears threatening to spill. I answered in a gasping voice that my husband promised if I just lent my name on paper, he would handle the contracts and funds entirely behind the scenes. Dr. Harrison let out a bitter, hollow laugh. He tapped the stack of papers and spoke firmly. He said Julian was deceiving me. He pointed out that the registered capital was listed at $10 million, but the actual company account held $0. The shareholder registry listed me as the largest shareholder and CEO with a 50% stake. Meanwhile, Julian and Sienna only held 25% each. Dr. Harrison explained he had asked his contacts in the real estate industry to investigate over the past few days. Julian's crew was approaching an out-of-state corporation, trying to secure a $4 million contract using exclusive fake land rights as bait. The moment the $2 million deposit hit the account, Julian and his mistress planned to siphon the money, disappear, and deliberately bankrupt the company. Dr. Harrison paused and looked at me with a mix of pity and determination. The shock hit me like a hammer to the head. He explained that when the incident blew up, the victims filed lawsuits, and the feds raided. The first person to be summoned and face criminal charges would be the CEO, me. I was the fall guy. If I were lucky, my house and factory would be seized to pay off the debt. In the worst-case scenario, I would rot in prison for decades under aggravated federal fraud charges. But Julian and Sienna, as minority shareholders who had not signed any documents themselves, would play the victim, claiming they were defrauded investors too, and walk away clean. He asked if I finally understood how vicious this trap was. The moment I heard the word prison, my entire body went limp, and all the color drained from my face. I broke down and sobbed loudly, my heart feeling like it was being ripped to shreds. I could never have imagined that the man I loved, the man I shared a bed with, the biological father of my child, was a monster devoid of humanity, willing to throw the mother of his child into prison and drive her to death just to enjoy life with his mistress. I cried and told Dr. Harrison how Julian had lied about losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin and drained the entire $500,000 savings I had broken my back for years to accumulate. It turned out the crypto crash was a complete lie, and he had used that money to buy a bright red Range Rover under Sienna's name and fund their Miami trip. I told him how I trembled over spending a few dollars on a piece of fish at the market and rode a rattling ancient sedan for years. Hearing my tragic story, Dr. Harrison clenched his jaw, the veins popping on his tightly gripped fists. He handed me a clean tissue and spoke in a reassuring, protective voice. He told me to listen to him carefully. He warned me not to act rashly and let my husband catch on. He said I absolutely must not go to the factory, confront him, or flip out. He explained that letting Julian believe I was a naive fool was the greatest weapon we had to turn the tables. I wiped my tears and looked up at Dr. Harrison. The pathetic, weak look in my eyes was gone, replaced only by the blazing fire of revenge. I asked the doctor what I should do, declaring I could never let those demons ruin my life and my innocent child's life. Dr. Harrison pulled a micro voice recorder the size of a pinky finger out of his coat pocket and placed it in my palm. He predicted Julian would keep pressuring me to sign. He instructed me to first reassure Julian that I would sign, making him drop his guard and think his trap had worked. But before I signed, I was to turn on the recorder and subtly steer the conversation to make Julian admit out of his own mouth that he was the actual decision-maker of the company, managed the corporate seal, and controlled all the funds. That recording would become the core evidence in court to prove I was deceived and used. The cold metal recorder in my hand felt like a heavy weapon promising righteous judgment. The anger in my heart burned away even the slightest lingering shred of marital affection I had for Julian. Honey, if any legal or debt problems come up, I'll take full responsibility. I promise. Once the money comes in, I'll transfer it straight to my account, and you can just sit back and relax on a pile of cash. Julian's confident voice was sucked perfectly into the micro recorder hidden in my cardigan pocket. The rain drizzling outside seeped through the windows, making the air in the house feel even more stifling and dreary. Sitting on the faded sofa, holding a cup of warm ginger tea, I fiddled with the edge of my wrinkled maternity clothes, looking down to act anxious and intimidated. It was to hide the extreme disgust boiling inside me. Julian had his legs propped up on the table, his eyes fixed on his phone screen. His fingers tapped the screen relentlessly, and a smirking smile never left his face. It was obvious he was texting Sienna. When I casually approached, Julian jumped, quickly flipped his phone face down under his thigh, cleared his throat, and looked back at me with an awkward smile. He asked if I was awake, pointing out that Leo had nursed and gone to sleep. He told me I hadn't given birth that long ago, advising me to avoid the cold draft and lie back down. I let out a deep sigh and made my voice tremble, acting like an ordinary, cowardly housewife terrified of the law. I brought up the Apex Holdings company he mentioned a few days ago, saying I had not been able to sleep a wink out of worry. I reminded him I had spent my whole life on a sewing machine and knew nothing about law or corporate documents. I asked what would happen if something went wrong with the company, worrying I might go to jail since I was the CEO on paper. I suggested we just live a modest life like before, saying peace of mind was better than making a little extra money. At my words, Julian's brow furrowed heavily, a look of extreme irritation flashing across his face. But he quickly shifted his stance, putting on the face of a very affectionate and patient husband as he stroked my hand and whispered sweetly. He told me he had already explained multiple times that he would handle everything behind the scenes. He asked why I was creating problems out of nothing. He promised he would meet the big players out of state and secure all the land contracts, saying I merely had to formally sign the papers. He assured me he would personally manage the corporate seal, bank accounts, and land deeds, reminding me I was his legally registered wife. He asked if I really thought he would harm the woman he planned to spend the rest of his life with. I gently pulled my hand away and looked up at him with innocent eyes. I told him I knew he cared about our family, but asked what would happen if the company fell into debt or got sued for tax evasion later. Wouldn't I, the CEO on paper, take the fall? He fell perfectly into my trap. Mistakenly believing he had completely fooled me, he swore on his life that whether it was legal responsibility or debt, as my husband and the actual owner behind the scenes, he would shoulder it all. He promised that as soon as the partner's deposit arrived, he would immediately withdraw it for the real estate operations, ensuring no tax issues would ever arise. He told me to stay home and raise our kid well, promising to sit me on a pile of money by the end of the year and buy me a nice house and a luxury car. He begged me to trust my husband. I smiled softly. It was the smile of a devoted wife who firmly trusted her husband, but inside, I was sending a bone-chilling sneer at his stupidity and cruelty. I told him that hearing him say all that put my mind at ease. I agreed to sign the documents if he brought them the next day. Early the next morning, Julian brought a thick stack of documents and urged me to sign. Wherever the CEO's signature line was highlighted, I wrote my name, Clara, without an ounce of hesitation. Julian picked up the papers, checked every single page meticulously, and laughed triumphantly. The moment his back disappeared, the smile on my face turned ice cold. That disgusting laugh of his was exactly the same as the smirk he wore in the filthy photos a private investigator had anonymously mailed to the factory just moments ago. I locked the factory door and tore the tape off the small box with trembling hands. Inside was a thick stack of photos and a USB drive. Even though I had prepared myself mentally, seeing those explicit photos with my own eyes made my heart stop and my breath catch. The first photo showed Julian and his mistress, Sienna, in revealing swimwear, hugging and flirting at the pool of a luxury Miami Beach resort. The next photo was in the underground parking lot of a high-end apartment building in Seattle. Julian was back hugging Sienna as they proudly admired a shiny red Range Rover that did not even have license plates yet. On the back of the photo, the investigator had written a note. Range Rover, registered solely under her name, paid in full with cash 2 months ago. My blood and sweat. The $500,000 I had saved up by staying up nights running sewing machines to expand the factory. That was the money he had siphoned off under the guise of Bitcoin to buy a luxury car for his mistress, all while making me ride an old, rusted car and causing my hands to shake over buying a piece of fish at the market. Whatever lingering marital affection I had left burned away completely in that instant. I hid the photos deep at the bottom of an unpackaged fabric box. Right then, the loud doorbell of the factory's steel door rang in the sweltering heat. From outside, Julian's shameless, frivolous voice echoed. He called out my name, telling me to open the door for a guest. He announced that Sienna, the major shareholder and top employee of Apex Holdings, had come to see me and Leo. Sienna stepped into the factory with an arrogant strut, not even bothering to wipe her shoes. She scanned the inside of the factory with a look of disdain. Then, looking at my face, which was still swollen from childbirth, she curled up one corner of her mouth. She remarked on how cozy the place was, telling Julian she would feel so sorry for him having to raise a kid in a place like this. I leaned against the edge of the cutting table, gripping the hem of my maternity clothes tightly, and stared straight into the face of the heavily makeup-clad homewrecker who had invaded my sanctuary. The expensive designer watch clasped around her wrist, and the watch on the man's wrist in the phone background she was blatantly holding. That watch was the one I had bought for Julian with my hard-earned pennies for our wedding anniversary last year, complete with engraved initials. Bringing his affairs straight into our home in broad daylight, my husband walked past the covered sewing machines into the reception area and set down a basket of imported fruits. Perhaps trying to cover up his guilty conscience, he babbled endlessly. He told me Sienna had insisted on tagging along to buy fruits for the mother and baby to celebrate my 1-month postpartum milestone. He bragged that Sienna was the core talent handling all diplomacy and sales for Apex, saying we would be seeing a lot of each other. Sienna twisted her waist and slumped onto the old sofa. She provocatively ran her long fingers, painted with bright red nail polish, along the edge of the baby's crib and clicked her tongue in mock pity. She commented on how much weight I had gained after giving birth, looking to Julian for agreement, saying this was why women were ruined after having kids. She claimed that was exactly why her Julian never stayed home and was always out working. Without changing my expression, I carefully picked up Leo from the crib, held him to my chest, and slowly walked toward the kitchenette. I poured a full cup of hot ginger tea and set the steaming mug in front of her, speaking in a very light, calm tone. I admitted my joints still ached after giving birth, so I couldn't be as skinny as young, single girls. I told Sienna she must be exhausted from traveling all the way out here in the sun and offered the tea to help her cool down. Sitting next to her, Julian exchanged blatant looks with her. He cleared his throat and changed the subject. He asked Sienna to show me the sample land contracts, suggesting they finish the business handover while she was there. Just then, my mother-in-law, who was bringing out soup from the kitchen, saw the scene. Seeing some random woman looking down on her daughter-in-law, my mother-in-law's face turned beet red with rage. She looked ready to charge at that shameless woman, grab her by the hair, and kick her out. But I quickly stepped in and placed a hand on my mother-in-law's thin shoulder to stop her. This high-level psychological warfare was something I needed to handle myself. Looking at Sienna, I put on a bright, eerie smile that would send chills down both their spines. I spoke in a deep, slow voice, like a wise elder giving advice. I noted how pretty Sienna was, how good she was at her job, and how she was dressed head to toe in designer clothes, assuming she must have a very reliable man loving her. I mentioned the red Range Rover she drove up in, and the luxurious watch on the man's wrist in her phone background. I said it was important for women to make good money, but the most important thing was finding a good man who would never break her heart and only looked at his devoted wife. I talked about how miserable life would be if a woman met a two-timing piece of trash who claimed to be busy feeding his family but secretly took another woman to resorts to roll around in bed. I stated that a smart, outstanding woman like Sienna would obviously know how to pick a proper man to take responsibility for her life. I added that unless she had been shot in the head, she would never act like a mistress ruining someone else's family and do things that would make the whole world point fingers at her. I asked if she would really want to drag her parents' name through the mud back in her hometown. I asked, "Right, Sienna?" My words, light as a feather but piercing to the bone, acted as an invisible slap across Sienna's shameless face. Her face instantly went white, then flushed a bright red from humiliation. Hastily grabbing her phone from the table and shoving it into her designer bag, her voice, unlike her previously flirty tone, trembled severely. She stammered, suddenly remembering an urgent meeting with a VIP real estate client that afternoon. She told Julian they needed to head back to Seattle quickly before the company got in trouble. Julian was equally terrified by my terrifyingly calm and sharp demeanor. He jumped up, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and grabbed his briefcase. With an ashen face, unable to meet my or my mother-in-law's eyes, he made an excuse in a shrinking voice. He told me to rest, saying he would drop Sienna off, wrap up the contract deals, and come straight home that evening. Watching Sienna run away frantically out the steel door, I looked at Julian with the most affectionate eyes in the world. I held his hand and whispered as sweetly as honey into the ear of a man who was about to walk off a cliff. I brought up Leo's 1-month milestone and the 1-month postpartum mark next week. I suggested we host a welcome baby VIP gala at a 5-star hotel downtown and invite all the executives from his old firm and the prospective investors for Apex Holdings. I told him that since he was working so hard for our family, I would personally make a special video titled "The Journey to Becoming a Father" and play it on a massive LED screen during the opening. I proposed including photos of how well he took care of me from when I was pregnant until Leo was born. I reasoned that people would be deeply moved, and his credibility with the investors would skyrocket. Once rumors spread that he was a devoted family man, I assured him the big players would gladly wire millions of dollars for the deposits. Hearing my devilish, honey-coated proposal, Julian cheered in delight. Thinking his stupid wife was taking the fall for his shell company while simultaneously boosting his reputation, he grinned from ear to ear. He slapped his knee and made a huge fuss. He called me an absolute genius, saying the idea was incredible. He promised to text me all the landscape and family photos immediately and begged me to make it look amazing. He told me having me as his wife was the greatest blessing of his life. He hummed a tune as he drove off in his car, full of the arrogance of a man who thought he was the smartest person in the world. The only fact he did not know was that the video I was staying up all night producing was a horrific death sentence that would shred his future and his freedom into pieces. "Shut up and let me sleep. You can't even sue the baby properly. What the hell is wrong with you?" Julian's violent, drunken shouting in the middle of the night severed the absolute last thread of hesitation lingering in my heart. He waved his hand in the air and mumbled in his sleep. He slurred, "Sienna, come here to me. I'm so sick of my fat wife." When the true, cheap, and vulgar nature of the husband who shared my bed was exposed so blatantly in his drunken state, the already suffocating air of the bedroom turned nauseating. Standing by the crib, I tightly hugged Leo, who was crying hysterically, startled by the thunder. A mixture of pain and disgust dug into my chest. It was a night of pouring summer rain. Julian, who had been drinking all night with his real estate scam crew under the pretext of entertaining clients, was sprawled across the bed. Even as his baby screamed, he just pulled the covers over his head and cursed. He grumbled about how annoying it was, saying his eardrums were going to burst, complaining that I couldn't even manage a single kid at home and wouldn't let a working man sleep. Pacing the dark room, I patted my newborn baby's tiny back. Hot tears dropped onto my maternity clothes. Honestly, for a brief moment, there had been a fierce internal conflict within me. Looking at the innocent face of my whining child, I feared that what I was about to do as a mother might be too cruel for him. I wondered if, when he grew up and learned that his biological father's reputation had been publicly destroyed by his own mother, he would resent me. I debated whether it would be better to just quietly gather evidence, settle for a legal divorce, and walk away. I worried I was only cutting off my nose to spite my face. But the moment I heard his horrifying sleep-talking in this sacred marital bed, sluggishly calling out his mistress's name and insulting his postpartum wife, the futile sympathy in me completely vanished. Mercy was a luxury for a demon who planned to send his wife to prison just to play around with his mistress. Once Leo finally stopped crying and fell asleep in his crib, I quietly closed the bedroom door, went into the small study, and locked it. Only the ticking of the wall clock and the sound of the rain hitting the window filled the silent room. I turned on the computer and began working as the director of a terrifying thriller movie for my son's upcoming party. The long, stormy night passed, and finally, the morning of the fateful Welcome Baby VIP gala arrived. I turned off the computer, pulled out the USB drive containing the finished video, and shoved it deep into my coat pocket. I opened my closet and took out an alluring, form-fitting burgundy red velvet dress, hardly typical attire for a new mother. I carefully applied my makeup and wore a deep, captivating red lipstick I usually never touched. Stepping out of the room, I saw Julian looking sharp in a top-tier custom black suit, his hair slicked back with gel. He was the picture of a stereotypical, successful young entrepreneur. He seemed briefly mesmerized by my strikingly alluring appearance, but intoxicated by the triumphant feeling that the five-star hotel tonight belonged entirely to him. He broke into a massive grin. And I want to extend a special thank you to my perfect wife, who has always stood by my side. Because of you, I am able to stand here today. Honey, and our little Leo, I love you. On the podium of the ballroom at the five-star hotel in downtown Seattle, Julian held the microphone and shouted confidently. Under the dazzling chandelier, the former executives and prospective investors of Apex Holdings, who filled the seats, erupted in passionate applause. Sitting at the VIP table, Sienna elegantly raised her wine glass, flashing a provocative and arrogant smile, as if treating me like a scarecrow on stage. People constantly marveled at him. They whispered about how perfect CEO Julian was, making good money and treating his wife so well. Julian stepped down from the podium and called me and Leo up to the stage for a happy family photo. He triumphantly tried to wrap his arm around my waist, but I smoothly dodged him, maintaining a cold distance, and firmly took the microphone from his hand. My ringing voice carried through the hotel's premium speakers, overpowering the murmurs in the room. Distinguished guests, and families from both sides. Tonight, to return my husband's beautiful tribute and to commemorate our child's special day, I have prepared a small gift. It is a short video capturing our family's most truthful moments. Everyone, please direct your attention to the massive LED screen behind the stage. Julian smiled brightly, leaned close to my ear, and whispered proudly. He praised my incredible sense, saying the old investors were going to go crazy over this video. Looking straight into his wavering pupils, I replied quietly, "Of course. The person most surprised tonight will be you." The lights in the ballroom shut off all at once, plunging the room into pitch darkness. The massive LED screen behind the stage flared to life. Accompanied by a warm, sweet piano melody, photos from our dating days in the flower gardens, and affectionate ultrasound pictures from early pregnancy played across the screen. The guests gasped in awe, murmuring that we were truly a match made in heaven. Julian stood next to me, chest puffed out, waving with a satisfied smile. But at that exact moment, when that scammer husband was at the absolute peak of his arrogance, the piano melody twisted grotesquely, followed by a harsh, static noise, and abruptly cut off. It was replaced by the chilling, cold beep of an emergency room heart monitor. Beep, 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 beep. The vast ballroom instantly fell dead silent, as if splashed with cold water, and the smiles vanished from people's faces. Instead of affectionate photos, a terrifyingly stark text, looking like blood-red tears, slammed onto the screen. While his wife was hovering between life and death, bleeding out from placental abruption, where on earth was this perfect father? Julian looked as if he had been struck in the head with a hammer. The smile on his face froze grotesquely, and the eyes he turned toward me trembled wildly with extreme terror and shock. His legs seemed frozen to the stage. He couldn't move an inch. The screen transitioned to a photo of my surgical consent form, stained with tears. Immediately after, an unimaginable barrage of explicit evidence dropped like bombs. A massive photo of a shirtless Julian lying on a sunbed at a luxury Miami Beach resort pool, with Sienna in a bikini leaning down to kiss him, filled the giant screen. The location and timestamp in the bottom right corner of the photo matched the exact hour I was fighting for my life, receiving blood transfusions in the hospital. The ballroom erupted into chaos like a poked beehive. The disgusted and horrified stares of the guests universally locked onto Julian and Sienna. Gripping the microphone without a tremor, I spat out every single word as cold as ice. Everyone, while I was alone, signing my own surgical consent form in agonizing pain to save my child, my husband lied to me, claiming he was out securing exclusive real estate contracts, and was instead enjoying a 1-month anniversary trip with his mistress. While his wife's life was in grave danger, he had his phone off, drowning in the pleasures of his affair. At that moment, the audio file I had recorded using Dr. Harrison's device blasted through the massive speakers, echoing throughout the ballroom. Julian's unpleasant laugh rang out. Honey, if any legal or debt problems come up, I'll take full responsibility. I promise. Once the money comes in, I'll transfer it straight to my account, and you can just sit back and relax on a pile of cash. You just sign the papers. And immediately following that was the ugly truth he had spat out while drunk on another day. Hey, Sienna, don't worry. My stupid wife worships the ground I walk on. I told you, she signed it without even knowing she's taking the fall. Once the $4 million hits, we grab it and run. This merciless audio file shattered the moral mask he had been wearing into dust. But my final blow was not over yet. The screen quickly shifted to a presentation slide titled Apex Holdings Fraud Structure. My name was circled in red as the figurehead CEO, fall guy, and the true nature of the commercial real estate scam. They had planned to steal $4 million in deposits from investors using fake land deeds, as bait was exposed in granular detail. The major out-of-state investors sitting in the front row jumped up, their faces turning beet red. They pointed fingers at the stage and hurled profanities at Julian. They had been inches away from becoming victims of a massive $4 million scam. The CEO of the company Sienna actually worked for was also present. He slammed his fist on the table and shouted in front of the crowd. He told Sienna she was dragging their company's name through the mud and ordered her to submit her resignation the next morning. He yelled that a piece of trash who ruins other people's families and runs scams had no place in his organization. The ballroom turned into an absolute living hell. Paralyzed with extreme terror, Sienna covered her tear and snot-stained face and flailed, trying to run away through the furious crowd. But her flashy backless dress and sharp stiletto heels were a problem. She tripped on a chair leg and crashed miserably to the floor. People merely looked at her with contempt, as if looking at garbage. Not a single person reached out a hand to help her. At the family tables, my in-laws collapsed, their legs giving out from the shock. My father-in-law clutched his left chest in humiliation, gasping for air, while my mother-in-law wailed like a madwoman. She stumbled up onto the stage, throwing away all her dignity, and slapped Julian across the face one more time with all her might. Then, in front of hundreds of people, she declared their relationship was over. She called him a son of a bitch and worse than an animal. She screamed that he had tricked his wife to send her to jail just to run off with a whore. She screamed that from today onward, he was no son of hers, telling him to never call her mom again, and that as far as she was concerned, he was dead to them, and that he could go drop dead. Julian stood frozen in place, sweating profusely as if caught in a rainstorm. He turned to me, his bloodshot eyes full of desperate despair, and screamed at the top of his lungs. He called me a crazy, venomous bitch, asking if I was finally satisfied now that I had destroyed our entire family. I hugged Leo tightly to my chest, looked down at the miserably shattered man below the stage with eyes as cold as ice, and answered clearly, I am not the one who destroyed this family. Your endless greed, selfishness, and ugly lies burned everything to the ground yourself. I merely put out the fire before it could swallow my son's life and mine. The moment I finished speaking, the loud wail of police sirens echoed from the hotel lobby. The revolving glass doors opened, and uniformed police officers marched in with grim expressions. An investigator held up an arrest warrant in front of hundreds of guests. He announced that, based on Clara's criminal complaint, they had secured undeniable evidence that Julian set up a shell company, forged private documents, and attempted to commit massive corporate fraud. He ordered Julian and his accomplice, Sienna, to accompany them to the federal precinct immediately. Click. The chilling, dry sound of handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the vast ballroom. Silver bracelets were slapped onto Julian's trembling wrists. Slumped on the floor, he stared in devastation at my back as I walked off the stage holding my child, the hem of my burgundy velvet dress swaying. He was watching his real family walk away to a place his hands could never, ever reach again. Clara, please drop the charges. Even still, he's Leo's father, isn't he? How can you put him in federal prison? A few days later, under the eaves of the factory, my mother-in-law held a black plastic bag of oranges, weeping and begging. The tears flowing down her wrinkled face were the strings of a futile hope for her son, who was now locked behind bars. I firmly but calmly detached my mother-in-law's bony, trembling hands from my clothes. My throat choked up, but I asked the crying elderly woman a question in a strong voice. Mother, thinking of the affection we once shared, I will call you Mother one last time. You think it's cruel of me to send Julian to prison? Then let me ask you, When my water broke and I was lying on the floor bleeding, where was he? When I was receiving blood transfusions alone, shivering in fear that my baby's heartbeat would stop while signing that consent form, where was he? And when that man conspired with his mistress to set up Apex Holdings, forged documents to pin a $4 million debt on me, and tried to send me to prison, did you know about it? If I hadn't caught on and protected myself, the person wearing a prison uniform and sitting in a cell right now would be me. Then who would raise Leo, and who would clear my name? My mother-in-law was left speechless, her face turned ashen, her lips quivering, but she could not offer a single answer. She could only cover her face and sob into the sound of the rain. I let out a long sigh and turned around firmly. I told her I hadn't hurt anyone. I had merely protected my child and my own freedom. I said since Julian broke the law, it was only natural he faced the law's judgment. The fraud case files had already been handed over to the federal prosecutors, and I didn't even have the power to drop the charges anymore. I told her to take her oranges and go home, and to take good care of my father-in-law in his illness. Leaning my back against the steel door, I felt like my heart was tearing apart, but I did not shed a single tear. The weakness inside me had died a long time ago, and now, the only thing left was the legal process to reclaim my complete freedom. A few weeks later, my sole divorce lawsuit and the criminal trial for the Apex Holdings fraud case were held simultaneously in the district court. I attended court alone, gripping an envelope of evidence with unwavering eyes as I took the witness stand. On the opposite side, in the defendant's seat, stood Julian, who had just stepped out of a transport van. Wearing a prison uniform with a shaved head, he was so emaciated he was practically skin and bones, his bloodshot eyes radiating a clear sense of resignation. Next to the defendant's seat sat Sienna. The arrogant mistress of the past was nowhere to be found. She sat with a pale, makeup, free face, and messy hair, sniffling constantly. During the divorce trial, my lawyer meticulously outlined Julian's horrifying grounds for fault, from his blatant affair while abandoning his heavily pregnant wife, to his malicious plot to frame her for a $4 million fraud. The middle-aged female judge, with strict, piercing eyes that seemed to see through everything, reviewed the recordings and the private investigator's photos before handing down a firm ruling. She granted my sole divorce petition, stating that the defendant, Julian, possessed zero qualifications as a father due to severe moral defects. She awarded full parental rights and custody of our child, Leo, entirely to me. Regarding the division of assets, she ruled that the ownership of the textile factory and our current residence belonged completely to me, serving as a substitute for future child support and compensation for the profound psychological damage the defendant had caused. In the criminal trial that followed, faced with undeniable evidence, Julian admitted to his crimes, offering the pathetic excuse that he had acted impulsively out of financial hardship caused by his failed crypto investments. As the situation turned against her, Sienna showed her true colors and began sobbing loudly. She pointed her finger at Julian and screamed at the judge. She claimed she had just been tricked by him, arguing that the shell company, the fake seals, and the forged documents were all forced upon her by Julian's orders. She yelled that she was a victim too. Furious at his mistress's betrayal, Julian glared at her and spewed curses. The two beast-like humans engaged in a pathetic, disgusting mud fight right in the middle of the courtroom, shifting the blame and tearing at each other. The spectators clicked their tongues and sneered at their tragic yet comical farce. Finally, the judge stood up and solemnly delivered the sentence. The defendant, Julian, was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for attempted fraud and forgery of private documents. The accomplice, Sienna, was sentenced to 2 years in prison, suspended for 4 years of probation. Bang, bang, bang. The crisp, decisive sound of the judge's gavel 3 times permanently closed the dark chapter of betrayal and lies that had suffocated my life. As Julian was led out in handcuffs by the bailiffs, he paused, looking back at me with red eyes, silently pleading for belated regret and forgiveness. But without a shred of lingering attachment or a single tear, I turned away coldly and walked out of the courtroom. To me, that man had died the night the torrential rain poured down. Mother, I brought Leo over to have some dinner. 4 years had passed. On a bright spring day, I opened the old wooden gate of my former in-laws' property at their nursery farm in Snohomish. My former mother-in-law, who had been working in the yard, ran out with a bright smile and pulled 5-year-old Leo into a tight hug. The sound of Leo's chatter and laughter filled the yard. The locals sometimes gossiped about me taking care of my ex-in-laws even after the divorce, but I didn't care. Even though we were legally strangers, I was simply fulfilling my moral duty and human courtesy as a decent adult. The house I entered holding Leo's hand was peaceful. Thanks to a flood of orders at the factory keeping me incredibly busy lately, I had shed my old, depressed, pale appearance and now wore a relaxed, radiant face. My mother-in-law took the holiday gift basket I handed her and wiped away a tear. She pinched Leo's chubby cheeks and smiled widely, marveling at how much he had grown. She ushered me inside, saying my father-in-law had been waiting on the porch all day for us. I familiarly walked into the kitchen, helped prepare a hearty roast and potato stew, and carried it out to the table. I served the steaming food to the two elders. My toxic tie with my husband was severed, but the warm affection I shared with these two remained. Sitting in his wheelchair, my father-in-law watched me feed Leo and teared up. He said he and his wife must have done something incredibly right in their lives to be blessed with a daughter-in-law like me. He added that Julian was off paying for his own sins and they had nothing to say about it, declaring that I was and always would be the only daughter-in-law in their family. My mother-in-law chimed in, saying she felt at peace seeing me successfully grow the factory and live so bravely. She told me not to care what people outside said. I smiled and told them to just eat comfortably. Just as laughter was blooming, the wind chimes on the gate rang, and Dr. Harrison arrived carrying some health supplements. It turned out that when Dr. Harrison was young and first opened his free clinic, my father-in-law had helped him out financially when times were tough. That deep connection from the past had blossomed into a solid friendship as neighbors, and on holidays, we gathered like this to spend warm, civilized time together. After lunch, I went for a walk with Leo along the purple lavender fields at the nursery. Dr. Harrison walked slowly beside me. The look in his eyes as he gazed at me through his glasses was filled with unchanging sincerity and respect. After hesitating for a long time, he carefully opened his mouth against the spring breeze. He said that watching me weather the storm, grow my business, and take such good care of Leo and the elders over the past few years had been truly inspiring. He confessed he had admired my strength and wisdom for a long time. He said he wanted to share some of my heavy burdens, cherish Leo like his own son, and stand by my side. He asked if I could give him a chance to step into my life. I stopped walking and looked at him. At the confession of this upright, warm man who had saved my life, a faint ripple stirred in my heart. A wonderful man like Dr. Harrison would be every woman's ideal type. But in that moment, the memories of Julian's horrific betrayal rushed back like a storm, crushing my rationality. Once bitten, twice shy, as they say. The massive fear that I might choose the wrong person again and end up hurting my child tightly locked the doors to my heart. I offered a very faint, soft smile, and shook my head politely but firmly. I thanked him sincerely for his feelings. I told him he was far too good a person and deserved someone much more perfect than a woman with a child and so many scars. I explained that right now, my entire heart was solely dedicated to running my factory and raising Leo. I admitted I was still too terrified of the memories of that summer night to even dare start over with someone else. I asked if we couldn't just remain as we were now good neighbors and reliable friends who occasionally checked in on each other. I told him I felt most comfortable and safe with this distance. A fleeting look of loneliness crossed Dr. Harrison's eyes, but being the thoughtful man he was, he soon nodded with a smile that respected my decision. He said he understood and didn't want to force any pressure on me. He promised he would always be right there at his clinic, offering to be the safest sanctuary whenever I, Leo, or the elders ever needed help. His consideration made my heart feel much lighter. There was no need to rush to lean on someone else's shoulder. The independence and strength I had cultivated myself were already serving as the most reliable pillars of my life. As I was heading back to the yard with my child, the postman parked his old motorcycle and knocked on the gate. He handed me a letter sent from the federal prison. The envelope was covered in Julian's terrible handwriting, smudged as if by tears. My heart sank for a moment. With his release on parole approaching after 4 years of imprisonment, it was a pathetic, begging letter pleading for just one chance to see his son's face. Right there on the spot, I flicked a lighter and burned the letter filled with his belated regrets and remorse, written from a cold cell. The bright orange flame swallowed the paper, turning his foolish attempt to disrupt the piece I had painstakingly carved out of my own bones into ashes, scattering them into the empty air. One late autumn afternoon, honey-sweet golden sunlight streamed through the factory windows, creating a warm, peaceful atmosphere. The laughter of clients dropping off goods mingled pleasantly with the sound of wooden rulers tapping against the cutting tables. I was meticulously checking the last sample boxes of the day, relishing the confidence of standing tall as the absolute master of my own life. My Leo was already 5 years old, growing into a chubby, smart, and deeply thoughtful boy. He was sitting on a small chair in the corner of the factory, drawing cute pictures in his sketchbook. While organizing the ledger, I felt a strange gaze, someone staring intently at me from across the main street. Looking out the glass window, I spotted a dark, emaciated man standing under an old sycamore tree. Faded work clothes covered in dust, deeply etched wrinkles. His past glamorous appearance was completely gone, leaving only a miserable sight. But I immediately recognized that it was Julian. He had been released on parole as a model prisoner after 4 years. He hesitated for a long time, repeatedly clenching and unclenching his fists. It seemed the urge to run away was fighting a losing battle against the desire to see his flesh and blood. Eventually, he took a deep breath, crossed the street, and carefully opened the factory door. Reading the room, the clients quickly settled their bills and excused themselves. I set my scissors down, straightened the fabric, and stared at the man standing a distance away with absolute tranquility. Julian didn't dare look me in the eye. He kept his gaze on the floor, his cracked voice barely a whisper. "Clara, I'm out." Hearing a strange man's voice, Leo looked up. The child stared at the skeletal, ragged man with eyes full of wariness. Then, acting on pure defensive instinct, dropped his crayons and scurried behind my back to hide. He gripped the hem of my skirt tightly with his 2 little hands, like a lifeline. The biological son, instinctively avoiding and fearing him, drove a sharp dagger straight into Julian's heart. His sunken eyes flushed red, and tears streamed down his face. Extending his trembling, rough hands into the empty air, he sobbed, "Leo, it's Dad. Son, Dad is here. Come here." But Leo dug deeper behind me. Looking up at me with his big, clear eyes, he asked in a terrified voice, "Mom, who is that man? I'm so scared of him. Mom, tell that man to leave." That cruel question coming from the mouth of an innocent child completely shattered whatever pitiful pride Julian had left. Unable to hold on any longer, he dropped to his knees on the factory's tile floor. Forgetting all shame, he smashed his forehead against the ground, weeping and wailing like a wounded animal. "Clara, I was wrong. I was absolute trash, worse than a beast. I know a guy like me doesn't deserve forgiveness. But please, please, give me just one chance to live like a human being. Whether I work construction or deliver food, I'll break my back working to make clean money and spend the rest of my life atoning to you and our son. I missed my son so much. Please, just don't take away my place as his father. My son is calling me that man. Clara, please." The miserable, agonizing downfall of a man who once thought he was above the heavens. Yet, watching him, I felt not a single ounce of vindication or joy. Only a faint trace of pity for a lost, pathetic human being brushed past me. I walked around the cutting table, helped the man prostrated on the floor to his feet, and sat him in the rattan chair in the corner. Then, I poured a glass of cold water and set it in front of him. My attitude was incredibly dry and polite, exactly as if dealing with a stranger who had walked into the wrong building. "Julian, drink this water and calm down. Sit up straight. Begging on your knees like this won't do anything but scare the child and scar him." Once he drank the water with trembling hands and caught his breath, I sat across from him. Staring straight into his sunken pupils, I spoke with an unwavering, calm, and heavy voice. "You say you'll make it up to us, but a broken mirror, no matter how much tape you use to piece it back together, will only show ugly cracks and can never return to how it was. When my life and my child's life were hanging by a thread, and you were rolling around with your mistress that night, my love and trust for you completely died. And the moment I learned your disgusting intention to set up a shell company to send me to prison, our ties were severed forever. Now that I've endured the storms with my own grit and built this stable, peaceful life with my own strength, your belated regrets mean absolutely nothing to me, Julian." He desperately opened his mouth to make excuses, but I lightly raised my hand to cut him off, delivering a decisive blow that severed all his futile hopes. "I'm saying this for your own peace of mind. I don't resent you anymore. Holding on to hatred only eats away at my own life. But getting back together as husband and wife, or you suddenly forcing your way into our lives acting like a father, that will never, ever happen again." Our connection ended permanently with the sound of the judge's gavel. "Leo?" "Yes, he's your flesh and blood. Since I know human decency, I have never once spoken ill of his father to him. I just told him his dad went far away to make money." I glanced briefly at Leo, who was hiding and watching from a distance, and then drove the final nail into the coffin. But not now. He is still too young, and his soul is too pure to understand the filthy sins you committed. Right now, your pathetic, guilt-ridden presence will only scar the child's soul. So go out to the nursery farm, take care of your mother, and look after your bedridden father. Whether you do manual labor or whatever else, find a proper, honest job and live diligently. Later, when Leo grows up, reaches an age of discretion, and decides to look for his father himself, I absolutely won't stop him then. But right now, please respect the peace and freedom my son and I have barely managed to achieve. That is the only atonement you can offer your son. My rejection, logical, yet sharp as a surgical scalpel, flawlessly sliced away every illusion in Julian's head. He looked at me, looked at the bustling factory, and looked at the son who feared him like a stranger, before finally bowing his head and accepting the silence. He had painfully realized that the home he had burned down with his own hands 4 years ago was gone forever. After sitting blankly for a long time, shedding tears in silence, he slowly stood up. There was no more pathetic begging. He had decided to shoulder the harshest punishment delivered by the cosmic law of karma, isolation, and being forgotten. He looked back at me one last time with red eyes and spoke in a fading voice. Thank you. Thank you so much for not planting hatred in the kid's heart. I'll go out to the farm, take care of mom and dad, and live quietly. Be well, Clara. Both of you. Julian's skeletal back, swaying as if a breeze could knock him over, exited the steel doors. Leaving only a long, dark shadow on the factory floor, the wind chimes rang out once more a final farewell to an uninvited guest who would never return. Watching his back disappear completely beyond the traffic lights, strangely, my chest felt as light as a feather, free from any suppression. It felt as if the very last knot tangled deep inside my heart had finally blown away. Once the strange man was gone, Leo came running over, threw his arms around my legs, and asked innocently, "Mom, that man is really gone. Mom, what are we eating for dinner tonight? I've been wanting Grandma's beef stew so much." I smiled broadly, lifted Leo into the air, and planted a loud kiss on his chubby cheek. Yep, the man went far away to work. Should we go to Grandpa and Grandma's house at the farm for dinner tonight? Grandma said she made delicious apple pie and stew just for you. Let's clean up quickly and go. Humming a tune, I pulled down the factory shutters, locked them tight, and held my child's tiny hand as we walked briskly down the streets of Seattle under the setting sun. A woman who has weathered the storm with her bare body no longer needs a fragile, false shoulder to lean on. For I myself have become a deeply rooted, massive tree, protecting my tender bloodline, caring for my aging former in-laws' remaining years, and practicing true love and duty. Looking back and forth between the remnants of the past fading away into the distance and the bright laughter of my child running among the purple flowers beside me, I was absolutely certain the greatest price a betrayer must pay is being thoroughly forgotten, and the sweetest reward for the one who survives with a good heart is an unshakable inner peace. Through this story, we painfully realize that relationships between people can only be built upon firm trust and genuine moral duty. When a massive storm hits life, a mother's independent spirit to stand on her own and her great sense of responsibility to protect her child are the strongest lighthouses safeguarding the young. Furthermore, even though the ties of marriage were severed, caring for former in-laws with deep affection and wisdom showcases a unique resilience and humanity. Standing at the crossroads of fate, I hope we all possess the wisdom to always sow seeds of goodness and righteousness as we navigate through the world. Because the law of karma in life never makes an exception for anyone. If this story of how my son and I broke through a horrific trap to reclaim our complete freedom and peace resonated with you even a little, please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications, and share it widely with those around you. How would you have handled this situation? I would be grateful if you left your warm and wise thoughts in the comments below. Thank you sincerely for listening to the very end.